The next item is the names of Deputy Lochlainn and Deputy Doherty. They need to resolve the dispute at Highland Bakery, Letterkenny, County Donegal. Deputies, you have 2 minutes each.
Sorry, Margaret, can't hear that.
Sorry.
Minister, we had a real debacle yesterday in Donegal where officials from Revenue and agents acting on behalf of Revenue sought to remove machinery from Highland Bakery just on the outskirts of Letterkenny. The employees working there then barricaded themselves in, and there was a standoff between Revenue officials and the staff that worked there. The background to this is that the owner, like many businesses, good businesses, has got into difficulties and owes Revenue money. He doesn't dispute that. The issue is, how can we come to a sustainable repayment plan? He's currently been asked, the owner, Kevin Bradley, has been asked to repay €20,000 per month, and that isn't sustainable. So the question is, and I suppose the question for Revenue and the dilemma for Revenue is this: we have 28 workers, we have 15 drivers, 43. You multiply that by 20,000 per year that it would cost the state, you're into hundreds of thousands that this would cost the state per year. And what my appeal would be is that Revenue would engage immediately with the owner. He's assured both my colleague Deputy Doherty and myself that he wants to try and resolve this issue and maintain the business. He has a full order book, but like many businesses, you used to get paid upon delivery. Now it's a month later, sometimes it's longer. So there's difficulties with cash flow, but I can assure you, Minister, that the owner does want to repay what he owes on a sustainable basis. I also want to put it on record that I appreciate Revenue have a job to do. The taxes collected are what are required to run our health services, our education services and so on. So it's no disrespect to them, but I would appeal to you, Minister, and to your officials to see that there is a possibility to resolve this. More importantly, there's a possibility to save these jobs in an environment in Donegal where unemployment, as you know, is huge, immigration is huge. This is a business that has been successful, and that can be successful into the future if you can assist, Minister. Thank you.
Minister, as Deputy Lochlainn said, this is boiling down to a company that's been trading in Donegal for well over a decade. Revenue have a job to do. They're independent, and I appreciate that there, and they do their job very effectively in relation to collection of outstanding tax liabilities. The problem here is that the scope of Revenue is to get as much of the tax in as possible and not look at the bigger impact. So, for example, if it wasn't for the workers who barricaded themselves into that factory yesterday, and the sheriff got access with his low loaders and took the machinery out of it, all of those workers would have been on the social welfare. They would be heading down to the social welfare office today. And that would, as Deputy Lochlainn said, taking on average secondary payments about 20,000 per person, 600,000, way in disproportion to the liability, the tax liability that this individual has. But to make matters worse, the individual wants to pay his liability, but he wants to pay it in something that can sustain his business. I'm asking you, Minister, and I know that there is independence in terms of the Revenue, but to intervene in some way to deal with, and it's a bigger problem than just Highland Bakery. I have a constituent of mine just contacted the office this morning. He's been given 7 days to pay off half of a liability, which is impossible for him to do, or the sheriff will be called. That will put 14 people out of work. I've been contacted by another individual just last week who paid his liability, but on the day after he paid his liability, and he was late, the sheriff was called in, and now he has to pay the sheriff's fees. In committee, I talked about the young wee entrepreneur, the girl who's been set up her own business, employed an individual, and the sheriff landed to the door looking for just about €2,000 in a tax liability. She had to scrape and scrounge to get that, to make sure that it didn't repossess equipment, but as a result of that there, had to lay somebody off. We've 21,000 people unemployed. The Revenue have a job to do, but this will cost the state more money in the long term if you put these people and these companies out of work, and every single one of them are willing to enter into a phased repayment with the Revenue. Now, I appreciate that there might be many chancers out there that have money, that have assets, and that don't want to pay Revenue. I am assured that these individuals, some of them have already paid their bills but are being charged additional fees from sheriffs. And some of the attitude of the sheriffs, and they have a job to do as well, but like you're talking about, encroaching on the mental health of individuals. Really, people who are really struggling, who don't want to put people out of work. And I know we all talk about job creation and all the rest. Like, this is two incidents, 42 jobs at risk in Highland Bakery, 12 jobs at risk in the other company, and I'll give you the details if you're willing to accept them at a later stage. But I'm asking you, Minister, to look at the wider scope of revenue and the impact of actually repossessing, which would automatically close down a company. That's without a shadow of a doubt, and put the company out of business. Put 20 in terms of Highland, put 48 people onto the dole, and would have other spillover effects in relation to the banks and maybe liabilities that would be to pay there. This, not even talking about the tax revenue that the state would lose by the fact that these 42 individuals would no longer be paying PAYE, Universal Social Charge, PRSI and the rest. Thank you.
Minister.
Thanks very much to both deputies and Last Highland. I want to say it clearly at the outset that I consider it would be inappropriate for me to comment on any alleged or perceived dispute between revenue and an individual taxpayer or business. Revenue itself cannot, for reasons of taxpayer confidentiality, disclose details of or comment publicly on the specific affairs of any individual business or taxpayer, and I think that is entirely appropriate. I also think that intervention by me in a dispute between revenue and a particular business or taxpayer would not be appropriate. It is a long-standing convention that the Minister for Finance does not intervene in matters of dispute between revenue and an individual taxpayer. I would, in that context, remind the House of the provision enacted by the Oireachtas last year in the Ministers and Secretaries Amendment Act 2011, whereby the independence of the Revenue Commissioners and the performance of their functions was enacted in Section 101 of that Act. Revenue plays a critical role in securing and delivering a significant part of the financial resources required by government to provide services and facilities for all our citizens. A delay in collection of the revenues due impacts on the level and timeliness of financial resources available to the government. It also facilitates those who withhold tax and PRSI payments and use those monies to improve cash flow and gain an unfair competitive advantage over tax-compliant competitors. Revenue's primary goal is to ensure that all taxpayers and businesses meet their tax and customs obligation in a timely fashion. Revenue expects that taxpayers and business organise their financial affairs to ensure that they pay their tax and PRSI debts on time. In that regard, Revenue promotes and supports voluntary compliance by facilitating taxpayers and businesses in meeting their obligations in as easy way as possible through providing a quality customer service. I am satisfied that Revenue approaches the task of securing the collection of critical taxes and duties payable to the state in an efficient manner. Internationally, Ireland is among those countries that make it easiest for taxpayers to pay their taxes. I know that Revenue is very conscious of the difficult economic and financial climate that prevails and the challenges for business and being timely compliant. Since the start of the economic downturn, Revenue has responded by actively encouraging businesses experiencing particular payment difficulties to work proactively with them when such difficulties start to arise. This approach is designed to facilitate the identification and development of an agreed approach between Revenue and the businesses concerned, through these difficulties, so as to act quickly to restore voluntary, timely compliance. Revenue has developed an administrative framework to manage such cases and has published very comprehensive material and guidance for businesses experiencing tax payment difficulties on its website. I am aware that tax practitioners and representative bodies have acknowledged Revenue's very positive efforts in this regard also. Revenue will endeavour to work with a viable business towards resolving the issues given rise to default in making the tax repayments. I know that Revenue has worked successfully with thousands of businesses over the last number of years in addressing those difficulties and in saving further thousands of jobs that would otherwise have been lost. I am advised by Revenue that crucial to the success of their approach is meaningful, realistic and early engagement by the business or taxpayer concerned.
Deputy McLaughlin. 1 minute.
Okay, Minister, thanks for your response. I accept the limitations that are applied to you by law, and obviously for understandable reasons you wouldn't want intervention by a minister in these matters. However, I think it is critical that, as Deputy Doherty has pointed out in this circumstance in Highland Bakery, that revenue look at the wider impact of an unsustainable repayment plan. Because in this case, and it's easy to do up the sums, if 42 workers find themselves on the dole, that's about €800,000 of a cost to the state per year. If you work off €20,000 it costs per person out of work. And if you look at the amount that's owed in this case, that's multiples of what is owed. So surely it makes sense to work on a sustainable repayment plan. And I'm assured here by the business owner, he's had a recent accident which may have caused some difficulties in communications. And I suppose I would hope that revenue, while of course they must have independence from the political system, that they would listen to the views that we have in relation to the economic environment and the belief that we have that this can be resolved. So my hope would be that, following this very unfortunate standoff that's not in anybody's interest, that they can engage with new negotiations with the business owner and agree on a sustainable repayment plan that's in everybody's interest. That's all I would put forward. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, Minister, look, as I said, revenue are very, very efficient. There's been wee glitches in the past, but revenue are very, very efficient and do their job very well. And without a doubt, if the Sheriff gets access to Highland Bakery, and they would have got access yesterday, the low loaders were there, the lorries were there, they were taking away the machinery, bar the workers themselves barricaded themselves in. If they get access to that business, they will recoup the money on behalf of revenue. But you as Minister for Finance, we as a Parliament, we as a state will be down more money, as Deputy McLaughlin acknowledged, 800,000 for 42 employees. And there's very little opportunity that any of those workers will get jobs in Donegal. We've 21,000 people unemployed. I know that they're working with other businesses and that's fine, but there's 4 files in my table that I explained to you that they aren't working. These people are willing to pay their liabilities, but they're willing to pay it in a way that they can sustain employment. I know that your limitations are there. I'm asking you to look and maybe a direction, or whether it's a change of legislation, to look and ask revenue, which might have been fit for purpose, in better times. But at this time, when jobs are our number one priority, to take on board the impact of closing a business down, and not solely, as you mentioned in your speech, recouping outstanding liabilities for the taxpayer. If there's a need for an amendment in that regard, we would support it. As I said, I know that they have to push the owners of these companies as far as they can, but if they push them too far, it closes down the company, it's a loss of tax revenue, and it's people that are going to be made unemployed.
Yeah, usually the Sheriff only arrives after a lot of other approaches have been made by revenue. And it's usually it's a last resort recourse, But if I might suggest to you that as deputies, you're entitled under law to make representations to revenue on behalf of the constituent. There's nothing improper in that. That has been made clear on a number of occasions. You would probably need to talk in the first instance to the company's accountants so that you're not at cross purposes, proposing something different from what he's proposing. And secondly, you'd need the written permission of the person you represent so that you're not breaching the confidentiality which the revenue needs to maintain with a taxpayer. And I'm probably the last person in the House that can approach the revenue because I have to have a very strict relationship respecting their independence. But there's nothing improper if you take up the cause and approach them directly.